Hello and welcome back to another episode of our draft series. I've got John with me. You might notice we have the exact same shirts on. We're recording these in a little bit of a bulk here to get them out before the draft. But today we're going to be talking about Dillon Gabriel. Gabriel is an undersized player that has had a few stops in college, also an older guy. But before we get into Gabriel as a player, John, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
All right. Gabriel is a guy I have to be a little partial to him because he's a lefty, so right off the bat I have to like state my biases here, but one of the few lefty quarterbacks that you see entering the draft. This is a guy that started off at UCF. He's, I believe, originally from Hawaii. Went to UCF, then transferred to Oklahoma after that. Had some decent success at Oklahoma, but OU had brought in Jackson Arnold to kind of be their answer, which, yeah, that hasn't worked out too great. But Gabriel was kind of ushered out the door before his final season in college football, and he landed at Oregon, which was a great spot for him. Had a very successful year for Oregon. They were the number one team in the country for the entire season, didn't lose a regular season game, and then got the reward of playing Ohio State in their first playoff game after not losing a game the entire regular season. That's great playoff structure we got there where that's your reward for going undefeated. But had a very successful year with Oregon in his last season in college football. This is a guy that is probably more of a college quarterback than NFL quarterback in terms of his skill set, but there's enough here where it still I think is worth discussing. So, John, if you to start just kind of breaking down Gabriel broadly speaking as a player, where would you start?
Yeah, you touched on a lot of it. He's one of the older guys. He's I think probably I haven't verified this, but he's I think the oldest except for Tyler Shuck. There may be one or two guys that's like a UDFA guy that's like 25 also, but he's smaller. He had a successful long college career. In the Shuck video, I kind of referenced his only 950 attempts. Dillon Gabriel had 2,111 attempts across his college career. So he definitely has plenty of experience. I think it shows. I think he did improve as a player throughout his career. You know, you go back and watch some of the early UCF games. You see that he does get a little bit stronger. He understands the game a little bit better by his time at Oregon. And I think he had more success as he went, although he certainly was a successful guy at each of his stops in different ways.
Yeah, the age thing is a big part. I think the only other guy that might get drafted would be Curtis Rourke, who's like 2 months
Yeah.
older, but I'm not sure he's even going to get drafted. So that's up in the air. Gabriel is one of those guys that you just wish he was like 3 inches taller
Yeah.
and had a stronger arm, because when you watch him play, it's like I loved watching his tape, and then I get down to like the actual eval and I'm like, I just can't put him like that high. Like I can't put
Yeah.
him as high as I want to because the the physical traits, the age on top, like all of those things just kind of force you to have a limit on where you would be willing to take this guy. On top of that, while I think the Oregon offense was great for his success as a college player, I do find it a little difficult to evaluate him because I feel like he faced adversity like twice all season
Yeah.
in that offense, which is partially because of how well he plays on schedule and how well he fit within that offense. But I am curious, like, are evaluators going to be able to get past the Ohio State game? Because to me, that like the game, the playoff game, the Rose Bowl game,
Yeah.
spoiler alert, that's where we'll pull our clips from, because I think that's probably the most representative of him from an NFL perspective. It wasn't a terrible game, but it was much rougher than most of the rest of the season. And that, I think, is when you start to question, like, okay, when he doesn't have a great supporting cast, when he's facing pressure, all those things, what does it look like for him at the next level?
Yeah, I think you touched on it there with when he's faced with Ohio State. You know, they have clearly superior athletes. bigger, stronger, faster. And when he's faced with that level that he's going to see in the NFL, it didn't work as well for him. And I think he struggled, and the rest of the Oregon team I think struggled a little bit more in that Ohio State game.
Yeah. Okay, last thing before we get into the specifics for Gabriel. I think he is the player I have the least bullet points for like bad things in his
Yeah,
game, which is because the bad things are so obvious, and outside of that, there's really not that much. But they're just such big deals that like you have to ding him for them pretty heavily. But I think that makes the conversation around him interesting. So let's start with what I think is probably his best trait, which is the processing.
yeah,
Gabriel is a very patient player. You can tell he's very comfortable in the scheme, and I think he does a really good job of not getting off of something too early. Like when he understands the offense well enough to understand, okay, this guy's not open now, but if I take another beat here and give him time to win, which especially with how good Oregon's receivers were at separating, like I can be patient with this and stick with the throw. He was very comfortable, like I said, in Oregon's scheme. I thought he threw with legitimate anticipation on a regular basis. Part of this is like when you're in an offense like this, you can get away with throwing with anticipation because you're going to be right 90% of the time. And I do have a few questions about that, but especially all of the processing things, I think you just watch it and it's hard to not come away impressed with those things with Gabriel.
yeah. He's one that I think when you watch, you just kind of get that he has a feel for the game. He's been playing for plenty of time, and I think that in his time he's cleaned up his game really well to the point that there really aren't that many. He doesn't force the ball too often. He's not making the wrong read. He's going through his progressions. He's able to see when guys are going to be breaking open, wait for them, get the ball to them on time. He's just a really efficient distributor.
Yeah, I even think he sees the field well as a scrambler, which is not something
Yeah,
I really expected in his game. Again, he's not some crazy athlete, but he can move a little bit. And I think when he is scrambling, he sees the field well, both as a runner and as a thrower. Um, Overall, like came away very impressed with the processing. I think the only thing that I would throw out there as a problem, and I think we'll see this on a couple of the clips later, is there are times where he blindly trusts what the offense is going to provide. And it's like one of the clips we'll watch, you can see it's like his brain sees the defender and is like, don't throw that ball. There's a defender there. And then he pump fakes it and just throws it anyways. It's just like, dude, like sometimes the offense is going to be wrong,
yeah,
which does not. I'm not going to fully spoil my comp. There are other quarterbacks in the NFL who have this same problem. They get called anticipators. That I don't know if like guessing and anticipation to me are not the exact same thing. So that is an interesting discussion with him. I think overall I would say he is good at that stuff, but I have a very hard time giving someone the full benefit of the doubt and thinking that they'll be like very successful purely based on like trust in a college offense.
yeah. I agree. I think he is good at those things, but I think that Oregon is. We talked about with like a Tyler Shuck, where the Louisville offense, you're asked to do a little bit more. You're asked to operate more of an NFL type system. The Oregon system is more on the Ole Miss end of the spectrum, where maybe quarterbacks are not asked to do so much. They do have a lot of things kind of predetermined, or their options are kind of scaled back to just make things run more efficiently and to make things go faster. When you have these really high tempo
Yeah.
offenses, you can only do so much on every single play. If you ask guys to do too much, you can't move at that pace.
Yeah, I think Gabriel, like I think the Ole Miss is an interesting point of comparison because where I would separate the two is I do think Gabriel throws more like varied route concepts. Like
Yeah.
Oregon will run a lot of like three receiver stuff where he's reading out like a flood concept or there's multiple
Yep.
routes going over the middle of the field. Like that to me is where you do get to see a little bit more of it compared to like Ole Miss. A lot of times there's just like Trey Harris run as fast as you can for 40 yards and Jackson Dart throw it over there. So you do see some of that, but I agree. Like the screens, all that, all over this offense.
Yeah.
Their receivers were very good after the catch. Um,
And
I off topic. I love Tez Johnson. I know he ran like a terrible 40 anyways, like 150 pounds. I think he is such a good player at the college level. He probably I
yeah.
don't even know if he'll get drafted honestly with the combine stuff, but I think he was very good in this offense. And the screen stuff, Gabriel's good at that stuff, but
Mhm.
is any NFL offense actually going to build the plane out of bubble screens? No. So like, how much can I really factor that in from an NFL perspective?
Yeah. And this is kind of a separate point. I'm going to jump back a little bit to something you said earlier. I thought he did use his legs well and used it to set up passing lanes for himself. Uh, he's not the most athletic guy, but I thought that his movement generally was just good. Um, within the pocket, also without outside of structure when he's scrambling, when he's getting outside to throw on the run. I thought that generally he just moved well, and I think that he kind of has to, being the size that he is, he's got to have something to
Yeah.
make up for that a little bit.
And some of this probably speaks to like his lower center of gravity, but I think he is a
Yeah,
shifty player. I would not describe him
yeah,
as a fast player. It's kind of the opposite of Shuck. Like he can move well in tight spaces. You're not going to ask him to
yeah,
get out and run. There was I can't remember what game I was watching where he broke like a long read option down the right sideline when they were backed up at their own 10. And he runs for like 40 yards and then fumbles at the end of the play because he gets hit hard by a guy that catches up to him. And it's like, yeah, like that's not really what he does, but he
yeah,
can make moves like that. And the other thing that I think is interesting about him, he's 205 pounds. Like he
yeah,
is a very stocky player. Like I don't have as many injury concerns with him as you'd oftentimes do with some of the other smaller quarterbacks because I think he's well built. I think he handles contact pretty well. There are times where he lowers his shoulder and can actually make a guy move a little bit. He's never going to be like a super physical player because he's still only 205 pounds. But for his frame, I think that is not as much of a concern as it is for a lot of the smaller guys.
yeah. Like the questions with Bryce coming out a couple of years ago was like, okay,
Yeah,
he's 204 pounds, but that's all water weight he put on for the
yeah,
combine, where realistically he's playing in that 190 range.
yes,
That's what he looks like on the field too. Gabriel looks a lot bigger, he's built a lot better, and I don't think you have any questions about his build. I think it's for him, his size, his height is the only thing you're really worried about there.
yeah. All right, let's talk about the throwing a little bit. We talked about a lot of the short game stuff. I think that's where you see him in his element. He's got a super quick release. I think
Yeah.
he throws with pretty good like touch and timing, and he understands like when he needs to put more on the ball versus where he can take a little bit off. He is like he is one of the guys where you can tell like he's accurate enough where he actually is like thinking about ball placement and
Hmm.
where would be the best place to put this for a yak. I think you saw similar stuff in the offense with Bo Nix last year where like they set up their receivers really well schematically for after the catch, and the quarterbacks have done a good job of supplying those receivers with those opportunities. I think he throws short well both in the pocket but also on the run. Like I think he finds good opportunities for that. And all of this to me culminates into like where I think he's best is usually where a lot of quarterbacks struggle, which is I think he's a really good red zone player. Like I thought he was very good for Oregon in short like in condensed areas where the timing, the quick release, the shiftiness as a runner, all those things come more into play. I thought he was very impressive in that part of the field, and you could like all the things he's good at throwing the ball are a big factor there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about the red zone. I had not noticed that, but I think that makes a lot of sense for him, and especially considering what he does well and the way that he sees space well. I think that is a benefit in the red zone, where some guys, when things get really condensed and really tight down in the red zone, they struggle to do that. I thought his arm was fine. It was solid. Um, he struggles sometimes throwing to the perimeter, throwing deep. I thought that he, when throwing over the middle, could put enough on the ball. And he was generally pretty accurate guy. I didn't think he was the most accurate, but to your point, he's accurate enough that he can try to throw with some placement, which I think is better than a couple of other guys in this class. Um, I think overall his arm is just like a C plus for me. Like
Yeah.
I think it is like the baseline, the lowest you would want in an NFL quarterback, and even then, it's like maybe it's still not really quite what you'd really hope for, but you could work with it if you needed
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, it's below average but serviceable. I agree with
Yeah,
that characterization for sure. I think the deep ball is very interesting because I actually think he's a very accurate deep ball thrower, but everything is a rainbow. Like you never
yeah,
see the just like 40 yards on a missile, like on a line, just rocket throw, and that's because he doesn't have it. Like it's just not
yeah,
something he's capable of. If I saw that from him, I would start to feel a lot more optimistic because he does I think he's a very good deep ball thrower. It's just he has to be able to get enough air under the ball to let it float and get there. When he does that, it's pretty accurate. You do see like because his arm's not great, if his timing's off at all, or if he can't really step into a throw, he is not a guy that can just throw with his arm. Like
yeah,
there are a lot of throws like we talked about with Shuck in the last video. Shuck can have weird arm angles and his feet can be bad, and he still can deliver the ball to a receiver and prevent it from skipping. There, Gabriel's the opposite. Like you will see throws where like his body's just not in it. He's not throwing
yeah.
with good timing, and like the throw just has no shot. Like there's no way the throw is going to get there. That's just I think a direct consequence of the physical talent that we're talking about here. But it's definitely something you have to take into account.
Yeah, I had that as well. That when he can't step up into a throw, I think it kept him from putting as much heat on it as he can, which is really not as much as other guys in the class already. So I think that goes back to his size, goes back to some of his physical limitations that just I think are the big question with him.
All right, let's get into the athleticism a little bit more. I think we've covered most of this, but just to kind of sum those things up, I think like as a runner, he can extend plays. He does a good job of finding escape options. I think he's shifty. Maybe not a. I think he's an okay top speed guy, maybe not great.
Yeah.
The other concerns I have that we haven't talked about yet, because we've talked about the size plenty. Like I did not think he escaped the pocket very well, and I did not think he escaped sacks very well.
Yeah.
Part of this, I think, just gets back to the size. Like he's just not a guy that's going to be able to shake off pass rushers. But I did not think he had like the top end explosiveness to get out of bad situations once he's in them. Like once he's like pinned in the pocket, he's kind of stuck, and it's just like can he get the ball out in time to avoid a sack at that point? And that is something where you start to think about, okay, like this guy's not super physically talented from an arm perspective. He's also not gonna create a bunch of plays to get you outside the pocket. And it's like, okay, you start to kind of like narrow down the places where he can have success at the next level.
Yeah. I think that you mentioned some things there. I think that when he does get pinned in the pocket, um, he also struggles to even get the ball out because guys are so much bigger than him.
Yeah.
And I think that he had some batted balls in situations where he's getting pressure in his face. Also, somewhere just guys are sticking their hands up and they're knocking the ball down. And I think I know we've talked about the size quite a bit, but I think that does come back to bite him in a lot of ways. Just that severe limitation.
Yep. All right. Anything else you want to add before we get to the clips?
Um, No, not that I won't add when we get into comparisons. So
Got it.
we can go on over to clips.
All right. Let's do it. All right. So, like I said, we're going to be breaking down the Rose Bowl game for Gabriel. I just think this is the most. It's hard because it's probably his worst game, but I think it's the most fair game to look at if you're trying to sample like what is actually relevant tape for him. But this is definitely the low light of the season, and you could certainly make an argument That he has other games that are much better, and he definitely does. First, here we're going to look at a play where I think this is some of the pocket stuff you don't love and shows the comfortability he has within the offense that sometimes comes back to bite him. Gabriel, I think, makes the right read on this play. He identifies the underneath receivers coming across the middle with space. But this is an example where I think he just gets very comfortable in the pocket and sometimes does not play with the urgency you would like to see. He waits and kind of takes that extra hitch, and the D lineman, I think this is JTT from Ohio State, he just gives him enough time where he comes around and makes a play. And this is a really good play by JTT, but it's one of those where you just wish like that throw should get off. Like that throw should be out of his hand. You can see here from the end zone angle as well. JTT wins here, but there's no reason that ball's not out. Caleb Downs is also closing on that tight end.
Yeah.
Like maybe give him a second before Downs is coming down. Those are types of plays like you just sometimes see. Okay, like this offense provides some structure that when that is removed, like can you still be as effective as a player?
Yeah, and he had plenty of space there to step up and rip that throw. And some of this is just knowing like your pocket is not just where it originated. It also can move around, and you got to kind of operate within it. And I think there he just loses sight of where the pocket is.
So we'll do another negative here, and then the last three are more positive for Gabriel. This is the play I was referencing earlier where his brain is telling him not to throw it, and he just does.
Yeah.
Who is it that he throws this ball to? I think it's Ferguson here, the tight end, which, by the way, I think he's really good. I would love for like the Ravens to take him in the third round. But Gabriel, oops, I skipped a little too far back. Gabriel drops back. He wants Ferguson, and they run a ton of this mesh stuff where Gabriel's like reading out underneath concepts. But Ohio State is in zone here. Like this defender is waiting on Ferguson to enter his area. Gabriel pump fakes here, eats it, and then still just throws it right at the linebacker. And it's like, dude, the picture did not change from when you thought this was a bad idea to when you then decided to throw. So you'll see, I mean, you can see like his brain thinking here is like he reads this out. He wants this side. He's like, oh, nope, I don't want to throw that. Oh, now I'm still going to. If this doesn't get picked by the original player, there's another guy there to bat that down. Those are the types of plays where it's just like for him to be like a quality prospect, his tape basically has to be perfect because the physical stuff is just not going to get him there. And so those are the plays where it's like, okay, it's hard to love him as a player when there still are some of these questions, even if overall this is definitely a strength of his game.
Yeah, I completely agree. Especially the point about, his physical limitations. He's got to play basically perfectly to completely make up for that. And, he obviously still does have some things to clean up.
All right, this is a play where I think he just does a good job of finding the check down, which for most guys, it's like, okay, that's boring. But, like, I do think he does a good job of this overall for Oregon. So they run a little, like, fake bubble here on this side, and then he's coming back across the field to read this out. But there's pressure, right? So at this point, he's a little off schedule. Like, he now is not able to, like, come back to Johnson in the flat. Maybe he could attempt this throw, but this is not, like, a open window. And the running back here, I think this is Whittington, has plenty of space. And Gabriel does a good job here of, even in a crowded pocket, like flipping his hips and just getting the ball out quickly. It actually doesn't get a huge gain. Was that Downs out there? I don't even know who makes that play, who makes that tackle.
Yeah. Ohio State's field tackling.
Yeah, they're so good. But that's a play where like Gabriel does his job there. Like it's not a great picture. He understands what he has out there. Like I love the guys who almost like don't even have to look to throw the check down. They just know exactly where their receiver is going to be, and Gabriel's really good at that.
Yeah, and these are make or break plays for guys who are not going to be, big play generators. You have to stay on schedule. You have to pick up the 3, 4, 5 yards when what originally was designed is not there. And I think he does that pretty well for the most part.
Yeah, and if you're not a scrambler, this is how you scramble.
This is your scramble.
This is how you pick up those yards outside of the original read. Okay, this play I think is a fun one and shows some of his. Oh well, first we do have the the end zone angle of this play. You can see again here, like good movement, even jumps to get the throw off, which of course he has to because he's 5'11", but
5'11".
he does a good job on that play. Okay,
Yeah.
now we're going to see some of the creativity he has on the move. Again, like this picture's kind of cloudy. Maybe if he fires this throw here immediately, he could get it there. But he has a gap open up for him here scrambling. He recognizes here as he's getting upfield, he can still pitch this ball, flicks it out. They pick up a big first down there. This is the types of plays where like I come away impressed with his creativity as a player, even if the athleticism does not always match that.
Yeah, and I think that this just goes back to having a lot of experience. He's not really. You can tell he's not really shaken by the big stage, because he's been around before, and this is a really fun play that most guys are not going to think of. Most guys are going to just go down and take what they've already got, but that allows them to pick up the first down and some extra yards.
All right, we've talked about some of like the pieces around the edge of his game. This last play, I think, is like what you're hoping for at the NFL level with him, which is we're going to see legit anticipation here in a difficult window. This is later in the game against Ohio State, which I also think is impressive because at this point, I think he's had to learn to adjust to the speed that Ohio State was playing with in this game, which was outrageous. So you're going to see Gabriel here. Ohio State sends pressure. He recognizes like somebody's going to get home. But we've got one-on-one here over the top, right? Like we've got, well, of course I go too far back again. But see, we've got one-on-one here, and that is not where I would want my feet to be as a corner against a guy that is probably going to cut in. That's not a great position.
Yeah.
Gabriel does a good job. He hangs in the pocket and throws this with good anticipation, leads his guy over the middle of the field. And for a guy that's smaller, this is just always harder. Like you can see he really has to like force this throw over the top of the defense, but he even throws it flat-footed, which is impressive for him. These are the types of plays where like this is what he has to do at the NFL level to be effective, which is like the picture is going to be cloudier for you because you're not going to be able to see the field as well. You're not going to be able to escape the pressure that comes. So can you still deliver an accurate ball over the middle of the field when things are rough? And in this play, he does that. And I think he's not bad at that. But these are the types of plays that you're going to be asking him to do at the NFL level.
Yeah, and I think that what he did well in college was seeing open space, throwing to open space, and putting it in place where his guys can run to go get it. He did that well here. To your point, it's going to be tougher in the NFL because there's just going to be less space everywhere. You're going to have less space to throw. Your receivers are not going to look like they're open, and you have to know when they're open. Despite that, and still, manage to fit the ball in those tight windows. And I think that he can do that clearly, but I think that it's just more of a long shot for him than it is pretty much anybody else in this class.
Yep. All right, I think that covers it well. Let's get into comps here. If you know my opinions on some of the guys in the NFL, I think I probably already spoiled who my comp is. I did not want to make this my comp. I tried to find someone else, and I just could not. My best case for him is Tua. I don't know how you could look at
going earlier.
Like I don't know how you could look at the Hawaiian guy that is undersized, that had a bunch of college success, that is left-handed, that like it's just every box. It's like it's the same. Like the only difference is probably like Tua was probably a more mobile player and Gabriel's probably a little bit stronger. And Tua was probably a more aggressive thrower. Like in college especially, Tua probably just put more like very impressive throws on tape, which is why Tua went in the first round and Gabriel was not sniffing that at all. But if he were to reach his ceiling, I think the way they play in the NFL is very similar, where you're asking them to play with anticipation. I'll put air quotes around anticipation and make those types of over the middle throws quickly. Like if he is in an offense like the Dolphins where they are asking him to get the ball out quick and you allow him to use his brain instead of having to use his physical traits, that's where he has success. I think best case you're talking about a guy that's maybe an average quarterback, if that. I don't think he ever really reaches that. That's with those traits, like that's the ceiling you're looking at.
Yeah, I think that the Tua one is really it's really funny because I think that so much of it is spot on. I think Tua had a lot more physical ability
Yeah.
just as a passer. And you mentioned, he was a recruited as a threat. Alabama used him as a runner early on in his career before some of the injury
Yeah,
stuff.
he was.
Um,
I think he gets underrated now for the athlete he was because of all the injuries. Like he could really
yeah,
move early on in his career.
he really could, and the injuries and some of the weight he packed on to try to prevent injuries has slowed him down. He's not
Yeah.
using that in the NFL, which is fine. You'd rather him stay healthy and play from the pocket because that's what he's good at anyway. But I think that that's where I kind of went a little bit differently. My comp, I looked a lot more at the size and physical limitations that he has. Um, and I will preface this with I have watched very little of this player because they're very old. But just based on like the size and what they had to overcome to play in the NFL, I went with Doug Flutie.
Okay.
Doug Flutie was like, which it's hard to find accurate heights for guys back then, but he was like a 5'10 ish, 5'9, 5'10 ish quarterback. Um, he bounced around. I think he played some
He was in the
CFL
CFL
or
for a while before
yeah,
he made it to the NFL. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I was thinking. CFL for a little while. He bounced around even within the NFL, played for a few teams. He was kind of that, to your point, like he had a little bit of success. He made it. He started for a few teams at different points, but he was never really a good quarterback just because of his physical limitations. And I think that's kind of where I would have Gabriel. Like, I really wanted to like him. I came away from his tape thinking like he does a lot of stuff pretty well, especially for a college quarterback. But I don't know that he's going to get any better. I think at 24 years old with 2,000 attempts, he's probably maxed out as a player. Doesn't really have any traits that you can project forward. If you're drafting him, you're drafting him just because he's safe. He does everything a solid level. And if that's really what you're taking, then I don't think you're going to get that upside that gets you a good quarterback in the NFL. So I really just went based on like Doug Flutie was like, he was all right. He is like a 5'10 quarterback who struggled to overcome his physical limitations. And I kind of think that's Gabriel could be. Although I think he could similarly like stick around for a while as a backup and like a practice squad type. He's probably super likable. I really don't know too much about that, but he played early. He played for a few high profile teams, and I'd assume that he's pretty well liked. So
Yeah, I do think he's a guy that sticks around for a while, just because like worst case he's probably a backup that goes in and does exactly what you tell him to do.
yeah,
The
and he
Flutie
probably
comp,
practiced super hard.
yeah,
But
the Flutie comp I do think is interesting because like I'm not going to pretend like I've watched Flutie play like
yeah,
at all. I mean, I've seen
same.
highlights and stuff, but
Yeah.
when you go back and look at his best seasons in the NFL, it was with Buffalo in 1998 and 1999. Both those years, those were the years by far he had the most passing success. But those years, he also in 98 he ran the ball 48 times for 248 yards. In 99 he ran it 88 times for
Yeah,
476 yards. That's where like he was able to make it work because he was such a good scrambler and could get out of
yeah,
the pocket. And that's where like with Gabriel, I don't see it as much. And I'm not like doing that to rip down your comp, but I'm saying like
yeah. No,
Flutie
I
at the
agree.
time,
It's not a
because
big comp.
people at the time just thought like if you're 5'10", you can't play, period. Like that's the end of it. I think what they didn't factor in was his ability to extend plays, scramble. He turns into an okay NFL quarterback. With Gabriel, he has to be even better at the other stuff because he's not going to be a guy that runs the ball 88 times in a year. Like that's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
All right. My worst case, and this is like, I actually think this is like a compliment to Gabriel because this guy was like my favorite college quarterback when I was growing up outside of like Tim Tebow, is Kellen Moore, who's now the head coach of the New Orleans Saints.
nice.
Lefty,
So you stuck with the lefties
yes,
for your
lefty,
comps.
like no physical tools, super smart, like stuck around as a backup forever because teams were just like, this guy
Yeah.
knows what he's doing. And obviously you see that translate into coaching for him. Like he's always been a guy that was like that. But just overall, like good at, like probably maxed out what his physical ability would allow him to do, but just never turned into a very good player at the NFL level. I think that's the more likely outcome for Gabriel. So Kellen Moore would be my more low end comp for him.
Yeah.
Which again, like Kellen Moore was awesome in college. That Boise State teams were super fun, but just probably didn't have like the physical ability to really make it work at the NFL level.
Yeah, Kellen Moore was one that you also like when you watched you saw he just didn't have the arm that most NFL quarterbacks do, and like it's fine. Like he probably could make it work, but um, he was mostly just a good college quarterback. So how long before Gabriel is an offensive coordinator and then
Yeah.
head coach? No, I could see that as a legitimate path for him.
Yeah, he could
Mine
definitely
is
call like a spread offense in college football in like 5 years, and I would
oh,
not be surprised.
absolutely, yeah. Mine is maybe a similar level of NFL quarterback. I had Seneca Wallace. I've used this one before for Bryce Young.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just the baseline of like little guy has a little bit of mobility, um, is not really going to do too much, but will stick around as like a backup for a long time. And I do think that Gabriel at least has that he's going to stick around for a while.
Yeah, that one. Again, not going to pretend like I'm familiar with Seneca Wallace's
Yeah.
game. He is 5'11", 205. So like you hit the
You're
frame
same
like
size.
perfectly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's probably about all I can add on that one. But yeah, it's hard. Like these size outliers, like there's not very many options
Yeah.
to pick from.
Yeah. All the guys that are like 6'2", 215, there are so many quarterbacks that are 6'2", 215 in NFL history. So you got a lot more players to pull from.
Yeah, the play style at that point
is a lot more.
Can help you out a lot more. Yeah. Okay, let's get into the grade now. I have Gabriel as a 6th round guy. I think this is probably pretty close to where he'll end up getting selected. I don't generally, the way I try to think about it with guys, unless you're just like, there are exceptions to this, but the way I try to think about it is like, if I'm taking you in the 4th round, I would at least like for you to have some starter upside down the road. Like you can at least maybe see a path where, 3-4 years from now, you're like, maybe this guy could be a decent player for us. I don't think I would ever want him to be my starting quarterback. Like even if things go well for him, which is why I come in with him as a 6th round player. I think like if you want a steady backup, this is your guy. Like just you stick him in the backup role. Don't ask him to do very much. And it works out. He is more of a guy, like, I think certain schemes would be way better for him compared to others. We can get into that talking a little bit, but I came in with a 6th round grade for him.
Yeah, I have him as a 5th rounder. I liked him maybe a little bit more, but at the end of the day, it was like he doesn't present any like real upside. He's just kind of a solid backup. If you bring him in as a backup, your starter goes down and he needs to play like 3 or 4 games. I think you could trust that like your offenses can mostly just run the same stuff. You might have to take some of the bigger plays, your more difficult plays that require more arm talent. You might have to take some of those out of the playbook, but he can run pretty much everything else and do it exactly as you're asking him to. And I think that still has some value. I think he is most definitely a day 3 pick, especially of the guys that we've talked about that like there is some variance there. You could see the projection, the upside. I think Gabriel is very safely a day 3 pick. There is no chance of him going day 2. I think it's more likely he'll be on the last half of day 2.
Yep. Yeah. In terms of, I agree with everything you said. Like in terms of fits, I think it's got to be somebody that operates more in quick game. Like I don't want to just I mean, Miami is the obvious one. Like that is
Yeah.
the type of system. Like I already
Wanted to go sit
we already
behind
did
Tua.
the Tua thing. Like I don't need to do that again. Maybe like one team that kind of stands out to me is like Washington. If they wanted a backup to kind of replace
Yeah.
Mariota, like they really spread it out and they do. Like Daniels was awesome in the quick game stuff last year.
Yeah.
I could see him succeeding well. Like he's not going to deliver the same like slot fade ball that Daniels does. Like he's not going to do it at that level, but that maybe that's a place where like if I'm not expecting Mariota to be there much longer. Maybe you try to
Yeah.
get your backup in at that point. But I do think like I would not be surprised if Gabriel did not get drafted just because I think a lot of teams are immediately going to cross him off and say like this just doesn't really work in the way that we want to play.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to
That's
see if anybody takes a shot on him.
Yeah, I know. I heard this has been like a couple of months ago, and I don't think this is legit, but somebody was like, what if the Colts took him in the mid rounds just as some
Yeah.
competition for Richardson and Jones, and like see what happens, because he's already a solid guy. He'd be one of the more ready guys to play. Um, So I thought that was interesting. I don't think he really presents a real threat to Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones, though, just because of the tools. Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
I
and they
think
run a
that
lot of the RPO stuff. Like he could
yeah,
they obviously when Richardson's in, like they're trying to. I mean, his A dot was like 15 last year, like
yeah,
which is average depth of target, and
yeah,
15 is outrageously
yeah,
big. So they would definitely have to change that part. But in terms of like the stuff they run, I do think that's a place where he could fit. All right, anything
yeah.
else you want to add on Gabriel?
Uh, no, I do hope he gets drafted. I hope he sticks for a while because he seems kind of fun. But
Yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah, I
about it.
agree. Very very fun college player. Like this is the perfect guy for like the NIL era where he
Yeah,
before he might have just tried to go to the NFL, but because there were opportunities available, he was able to make a lot of money. Like you got to see him play in college for another year and have a great year with Oregon. So
yeah, which is great for him because like we talk so much about like this guy doesn't have this, he doesn't have the NFL arm. Gabriel is a really talented guy. He just has some of the physical limitations that will never
yeah,
really play for the uber elite athletes in the NFL. So, you really appreciate that he can make some money for him and his family off of his talent while he's in school.
yeah,
So, that is fun about him playing in the NIL era.
yep. All right, that'll do it for the Gabriel episode. Continue to stick around. We'll have some more episodes coming out this week. So thanks everybody for listening.